welcome to Pedder Unplugged. This is the podcast about Tasmania's wild, mystical and controversial Lake Pedder that was flooded in 1972. Yep, 50 years ago this year, this national icon was flooded to create a hydro storage lake. And ever since the flooding, the campaign has continued to see it restored to its natural state. I'm Tabitha Badger, and today I'm joined by Carol and Richard Donahey. Carol and Richard are extraordinary bushwalkers. These guys have so much worldly experience. They've really seen it all. But something about Pedder, something about Tasmania, has just captured their imagination. They live in the remote northwest of the state, so reception's a little bit patchy. In this episode, Carol and Richard share their stories of bushwalking in Tasmania, their experiences with legends like Tenzing Norgay and Olegas, and how much Lake Pedder has impacted their lives. So if you enjoy a good Tasmanian bushwalking story, this episode is for you. So please, enjoy this episode of Pedder Unplugged with Carol and Richard Donahey.
I'm Richard Donahey, and my memories of Lake Pedder go back more than 60 years. I first became aware of Lake Pedder in 1961 when I started a degree in agricultural science at Sydney University. I joined the Sydney University Bushwalk, and I saw the images of Lake Pedder that older members showed at the slide evenings. And so I decided I had to go down to Tasmania and see it for myself. So I first came to Tasmania in December 62, and then I started bushwalking in January of that year. So that's 60 years ago. Together with my fellow bushwalkers, we flew into Lake Pedder, and it was a beautiful fine day. The view of the lake coming up was just stunning. It was just breathtakingly beautiful. And we landed on the beach and just sort of didn't really want to leave, but we went off to climb Mount Anne. We came back to Pedder, and then we walked to Medina over the Sentinel Range. So that was my first experience of Lake Pedder, and it was just truly amazing. So my next encounter with Pedder was later that year in December 1963, when the Sydney bushwalkers came down to Tasmania again to traverse the Western Arthurs, and very few people had done that. So the first person we wanted to talk to was Olegas, and that was the first time I met him. And so we met Melba and Olegas in their West Hobart home that Olegas built, and they were both very generous people. We were truly astounded by the feats of Olegas, and he showed us all his slides and his magnificent black and white photographs of the Western Arthurs. And he was obviously supremely fit, because he would say, I'd race up the moraine here to Mount Hayes, pitch my tent, and then I'd just sit there and wait for days for the perfect photograph to get the right light and the right shadows and the right clouds. But he had no ambition of doing a traverse. He did most of the Western Arthurs, and he had a beautiful set of slides. After that trip, I guess I went back to university, but in 1967, I was working in New Guinea, and so I wanted to go to New Zealand to do some snow and ice climbing, and that's when I met Carolyn. And so we were kindred souls, and we walked with the Sydney University bushwalkers and alpine climbed in the Alps. But later there was just the two of us, and so I came down to Tassie in October '69. We got married, and then in December of that year, we just decided to go back to Lake Pedder and walk into the Western Arthurs.
And
she should have pulled me up to it.
But when I first saw Pedder, and I was a first-year university student, 1964 at Tasmanian University, and I joined the Mountaineering Club. Now, I was already a really keen mountaineer, because I'd been part of the Hobart Walking as a 14-year-old. So I basically joined them as a 14-year-old. So as a 17-year-old university, I was a really keen bushwalker, and therefore every weekend that's what I did. So I was invited to join. They were all leaving students. They were all third-year university students, or third and fourth year, so we're sort of people who'd actually bushwalked for their whole university time, and they invited me to come along on a Mount Anne at Easter, and Mount Anne sort of Easter was 4 days, and Mount Anne was a pretty remote peak in the, at that time. But what we'd heard is that the HEC had actually started putting in a road, and therefore it would mean that we could do and climb Mount Anne in 4 days. And rather than starting off at Medina, Port Davey track, which was, a fairly decent walk in from Medina, if but Easter, we decided, right, this can be done, and that's what I did. And basically, and I won't go into the details of the whole walk, but when we actually got to sitting on the top of Mount Anne on the second day, we walked into Condominion Creek on the first day, and the second day we climbed Mount Anne from Condominion Creek and sat on the top of Mount Anne, and we had this amazing jewel in front of us. Like Lake Pedder was the jewel of the southwest, and it was that, was just amazing. And we sat there and didn't want to leave the top from seeing that view of Mount Anne, but seeing that view of Pedder, which was the jewel, of the southwest. It was just a fantastic experience, and so that will always live with me. That Easter trip as a first-year university student into Mount Anne. So that was 1964, and so basically I spent a lot of my other years then at university bushwalking, but never went back into Mount Anne, because what had happened at that time, in 64, Lake Pedder was actually part of the national park. It was declared national park, so it had a status. So we didn't ever think that would not be there. But after that, of course, I think it was 67, and then by 69, the government reversed everything and then decided that the whole thing was going to be flooded. And so it was pretty tumultuous times. And I decided that I really did want to actually walk on the beach at Pedder. I needed to do that if I could. And it was at the end of the school term. That's what we do. We packed up. We packed our packs, put in 10 days worth of food, and decided to go in there.
Before we go back to Pedder,
yeah,
Carolyn, you can talk about Olegas.
It was a bit of a time. Of course, I joined the canoe club at the uni, and I actually went canoeing with the Olegas. And so I guess the whole Olegas, Truchas, Pedder, and Tasmania is sort of very much part of me. Somebody I had huge admiration for what he could do, and I suppose also it was pretty tumultuous times. And I used to go up to the old hut, and there was the Olegas black and white photos around the walls, which were just amazing. So I guess that influence of him and his photographic work and his amazing physical pursuits that he achieved, but basically by himself, was an inspiration to me.
Thanks, Carol. We decided to go back to the Western Alps. Carol hadn't been there before, but in the spirit of Olegas, we weren't going to do the traverse. I was just going to show Carol some of the very special places. So we walked up the moraine, up to Mount Hayes, lingered there a bit, walked on to Square Lake, a little bit beyond where you get the magnificent views of Lake Oberon. And what Olegas used to do, we'd sort of race up one moraine and then get his pictures and then race down another moraine. So from Square Lake, we just took off down a moraine down to the Flames again. And then we walked into Pedder. And it was absolutely amazing and really joyful going back there. And who did we see on the beach? The whole Olegas family, Olegas, Melba, and two of their children. And Olegas was there getting as many photographs as he could, because at that stage we all knew that it was going to be flooded.
Yeah, I guess we left for Canada. We left for Canada the next year. Yeah, and I guess when we came back to Tasmania, coming back to, you just wanted to talk about the Franklin campaign, just how we weren't able to go out into the bush, because that was your first year teaching, but how that was a really something that we followed all the time. We watched it and we were influenced by it. everybody that campaigned hard for that. And I was just thinking of that the morning of the High Court decision.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Carol. Yes, I was teaching, and I think it was about 11 o'clock when I just heard the decision that, the decision by the High Court went in favour 4-3 to save the Franklin River. And so I was euphoric. So I was supposed to teach a certain subject, but instead I just went into the classroom, and for one whole hour I talked about wilderness preservation, the Franklin, and everything else. And the students just sat there mesmerised. Yeah. But later, some of them came up to me and said that, I work in that area now in restoration, and so that was really good. So that was a real highlight.
What impact do you think losing Pedder had on the successful campaign to save the Franklin?
Oh, it had everything to do with the Franklin campaign. I mean, for one thing, like the society, they were so much more informed. They were more media savvy. We didn't have Olegas, but we had Pedder Unplugged with these photos of the splits and Big Island Bend. All those were just sort of so pivotal. It was just so much more sophisticated. And of course, we had the right Prime Minister at the right time who was willing to step forward and say, we'll save the Franklin.
Yeah, and we also had that energy. The conservation movement had energy to really to save it. Like Pedder had been lost, and we were so devastated by that, and therefore it was like we're not going to, we're going to fight. This needs to be won. I think we felt really strongly, and that the energy was definitely came about from the loss of Pedder, for sure.
Yeah, and the spirit was like never give up.
That spirit is very strong still today. When 50 years later, we still have the campaign to see Pedder restored.
Yes.
Carol, you said before we started recording that you've got a poster of Lake Pedder on the wall.
Yes, I do, and it has been on our wall for the last
30 years.
35 years. Yeah, 35 years. So I walk past it every day. So it's the iconic one, the iconic with the St. John quote at the bottom, that one day how we can undo what so tragically has been done. That to undo.
Yeah, something like we can undo what has foolishly been done.
Yeah, so we're very much behind the restoration, and I think it's an incredibly exciting. Yeah, and I do feel in my lifetime it won't happen, but I just really like to think that it will happen.
Well, I'm hoping that Carol says it may not happen, but I would like to see it start to happen very soon, like in this decade, in the decade of ecosystem reconstruction. So that's what you're.
So before you went to Canada, what was the community sentiment around Pedder? Were people broadly aware of the issue? Would you say majority of people within the community were outraged about the prospect of flooding Pedder, or were people largely in support of it because of the magnitude of the hydro and the number of people that it employed locally?
Yeah, well, Carol can talk on behalf of Tasmania, but I grew up in Sydney, and when we came back from Canada, we stayed a few months in Sydney while I was waiting where to go, and all my old bushwalking friends were absolutely fans of Olegas. So he'd already died in his tragic accident, and it was like, if only we had more Olegases. But the spirit was really strong amongst all our, Sydney friends.
Yeah, I have to say, the community did know, because it wasn't publicised. It was, as bushwalkers, you see, and as keen, really committed bushwalkers, we knew, but there weren't many of us at all. And so to get the message out to the ordinary, population, they were completely unaware, really. They were completely unaware, because the hydro had enormous power and prestige and support because of jobs and all those sort of things. And I just really feel there wasn't any knowledge of there wasn't any awareness of the amazing natural environment that we have. I mean, Olegas, he was just one person and he could influence people like us, but there were not very many other people, He influenced people, but it's still a small number in the end when you think about everybody. Things operate differently through the media,
Did either of you ever get to experience Olegas' slideshow?
He had quite a few, and I did go to one in the tunnel when I was still at school. Yes, I just remember there being an awful lot of people there. It didn't have the effect for me as it did for some people, because I think I was fortunate as a teenager that I spent so much time walking. I actually had, I'd actually spent even an Easter with Tenzing Norgay, because Tenzing, actually came to Tasmania at our education, I think, and they organised a camp for young people, and I was a 14-year-old at that time, and so I'd actually, spent time, climbing mountains with him, and so I'd actually been, so therefore the natural environment, the mountains, and were just so much part of me then. I actually realised the importance of them and how magnificent and how important they were. And Pedder Unplugged was also in my class too. And he was a very quiet person in the class, but I guess as a student, I was particularly, I was very, very fortunate to have these experiences, and so therefore a slideshow for me didn't have the impact that it did.
What was it like walking with Tenzing?
Oh, Tenzing. Yeah, well, what a beautiful man. You see, he humble, and wonderful to actually, to walk with somebody. This was actually at Mount Field. Yeah, we climbed all the Mount Field West and Mount Field East, and a wonderful experience, because at night he would, he would just talk. He would talk. We'd have the little talks of how you live your life. I have a photo of him. I took a black and white photo of him standing outside Peterson Hut. But just the fact that he came to Tasmania just to spend time in our little peaks with young people was...
What an experience for a few Tasmanians. That's extraordinary. Have both of you together or individually been to the present Pedder impoundment?
Yeah, we have, but it took many years. It was 20 odd years for Richard. I think I did that, but Richard didn't want to come on that trip with me, and he said, "No, I'm not going in now."
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Yeah, so we were training to go to the Himalayas in Nepal. Our last walk was the premier day walk in Tasmania, Mount Ann a day. So I said, "Okay, we'll climb Mount Ann." So that was in 1996. So that was the first time I went back and actually saw Fake Pedder. And I wrote in the logbook that, I didn't really want to come here to see Fake Pedder, but, I've seen it now, but it's taken a very long time. Now's the time we've got to start restoring and reclaim the true Lake Pedder.
And in your conservation experience, you spoke before on the Franklin about the right Prime Minister at the right time and the momentum flowing on from the loss of Lake Pedder. Is there a time now when we are in this climate and biodiversity crisis, there's an uprising of young people fighting for the environment, that you can see that the circumstances are perhaps aligning, that there is now a window where restoring Lake Pedder is a real possibility for Tasmania?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Despite what's going on around the world, I mean, we really have to seize the moment. This is the decade where we've got to think big as you're doing, and I think things can happen. And I think it will be a beacon for the rest of the world to show what can be done. Throughout history, especially in North America, dams have been decommissioned and restored. So you've got the evidence there from your research. It's just a political will now. and get the people behind you. And I'm optimistic it can be done.
And what about you, Carol? Do you share?
Oh, yeah, look, I hope so too. I do. It could be wonderful because in an age where now restoration is actually talked about, wonderful thing to show how it can be done so well, so we have that opportunity. I mean, the stage is set in a sense.
And I'd like to think we're heading that way too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an optimistic prospect in what otherwise seems like such a bleak future for the natural world and then by association humanity. For both of you, and it's probably really difficult to pick just one thing, but what were the really, defining features of Pedder? Is there anything in particular that really made it that jewel of the Southwest?
Yeah, it's more. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's more than just the jewel. I mean, it has that. I know when I first went there, that sort of it's that hypnotic, sort of mesmerising feeling about you. It's just so peaceful and tranquil. The sand beaches and the lakes, and the Flinker Range and the Mariah Creek, and all that together. It's just there's no other experience like it. And I just hope that other people can have that same experience in the future.
It's hard to pick out, though, something about Pedder that is the whole place was incredibly special. Like when you sit, on the top of Mount and you see it, and you see that sand, the white sand, and it's just like a picture that you couldn't imagine more beautiful, and I suppose, the mountain ranges on either side and the way the book was framed by the mountains. So it's like somebody to draw a beautiful picture, and how could they ever get it so beautiful? It's like, how could it be so beautiful? How can, and that's why I think, but when you actually when you were there on the sand, it was again like, it was there, is this real? Like you had a feeling of that this sand was so unlike anything else in the Southwest, so that to me, the jewel of the Southwest was there was nothing else like it.
That was episode 7 of Pedder Unplugged with Carol and Richard Donahey. As always, if you'd like to learn more about Lake Pedder and to keep up with the restoration efforts, visit lakepedder.org. Or if you'd like to share your stories with us, send us an email, lakepedder.org@gmail.com. I'm Tabitha Badger, and thanks for listening.